are a small watershed association based in Fayette in Westmoreland County, but we are home of the Youghiogheny River Keeper. So if you're familiar with Ohio Pile, the Youghiogheny River flows through there. We do a lot of work within the greater Yaugh watershed, and actually we're expanding our Marcellus involvement to pretty much the entire southwest DEP region, so a 10-county region in Pennsylvania, in the area where there is a lot of activity currently going on right now. I'm going to talk to you today about a project we developed called the Marcellus Citizen Stewardship Project. And what happened was in like 2007, 2008, when this started to heat up, citizens were calling us, were concerned, they didn't know what to do. The watershed always has had a leading role in environmental issues, and they just felt powerless, like this is coming and we can't do anything. So we tried to develop some sort of project that would give them a little bit more control on what was going on in their community as best that we could. And so we developed this stewardship project to inform, empower, and engage community members. And it has two big aspects to it. And one of it is monitoring and being a watchdog in your neighborhood as development is coming in to kind of enforce the industry or pressure them in a way to take the right practices and not cut corners because they know they're being watched by the community. And then the other aspect is just to educate, engage, and empower community members. So when choices come to them, they know what Marcellus is. They know the difference between shallow gas drilling and deep gas drilling. And when a landman approaches them at their door, they're not just blindsided by this legal lease that's approached to them and all the nice, juicy, fun stuff the landman promises them, that they know what the actual realities are. They've seen what's going to happen and they've learned about it. So to just better educate communities to be prepared for these decisions that are going to be forced upon them within the next few years. So we utilize citizen surveillance, and today I'm really going to touch on our visual assessment portion of it. We've recently expanded it to include water monitoring with technical monitors and data, and there's a little bit more training needed for that. There will be a workshop this afternoon by Alarm, who will be giving you sort of a quick water monitoring protocol, and that's who we partner with to do our water monitoring trainings. But the visual assessment is great for that reason because you don't have to have technical skills. You don't have to have a $100 meter to go out and do it. And it's something you can do on your regular bike ride or hike through the woods or some area that you're commonly in, because you'll learn real quick, and I'm going to go through that, how to notice things that are off key right away. And the more you do it, the better you get. I can be driving my car down the road and out of the corner of my eye tell if their erosion sedimentation controls are proper or not. So, the more familiar you get with it, it's really easy to spot when they've got something that's not proper on their well site. And one of the goals of this was to assist the DEP in surveillance and reporting on the industry. Alan Eichler, who's the Southwest Region head of the DEP Oil and Gas Office, has said at numerous public meetings and hearings that he needs the citizens to be the eyes and ears for the DEP because they only have 200 inspectors for 5,000 drilled wells in the state of Pennsylvania. So they don't have enough manpower to really keep a good watchdog on this industry. Now, we are experiencing some issues, and I can talk about this later with questions with DEP response to citizen complaints. And then to also just provide transparency. We're uploading a lot of this data onto our website and onto the Frac Tracker database so that anybody can see, what companies are acting better than other companies. So if you are going to sign a lease, you can say company X has 20 complaints from citizens and company Y has none. So maybe they're a better actor than another one. So I'm going to go a little fast, and this visual assessment training is a 3-hour training that I've condensed into an hour for you guys. And really what I left out a lot of is sort of the environmental impacts. When we give the training, it's sort of informational and training at the same time, because we have a lot of people who are coming who just want information, who have no desire to really go out and see what's going on. They just want to learn, and that's one of the aspects of the project. And then the other part of it is the actual going out and being a watchdog. So I focused more on that for this training because as you guys, have farms or living in rural communities, you're very likely to see this activity happening close to your community, and you want to know what to look for and what are the proper practices that they should be doing with current regulation. I will talk a little bit about the environmental impacts, but afterwards, if you have questions on something, just write them down and I can explain it in more detail. So our former DEP secretary said, impacts are inevitable. A natural gas drilling boom will inevitably result in some environmental damage, including possible contamination of water supplies. So there are basically 4 basic potential impacts with the development of this industry coming in. You have a long list of water impacts, a long list of air impacts, aesthetic impacts. Our watershed is in a huge tourism region. Ohio is in the Youghiogheny watershed, brings in millions of dollars a year in tourism revenue. So this whole economic argument and aspect to the drilling isn't really that crucial in our region. We've got a thriving economy from local tourism, and we don't want them to destroy that by ruining our aesthetics in the region. And then the amount of pipelines that are coming in create a lot of impacts as well. And so I will touch on each of these topics through. So with water impacts, you have 3 basic types of water impacts. The wastewater treatment. Up until 2009, wastewater treatment for this industry was a real concern and was severely impacting the rivers, especially in southwestern Pennsylvania. They were treating the water by taking the majority of it to wastewater treatment facilities who weren't capable of getting out all of the salts and some of the organic compounds that were in the water, and was just diluting it and dumping it into the rivers. And in 2009, the Mon was actually voted one of America's most endangered rivers, and the bromide and TDS levels in the Mon were through the roof. Since then, the DEP has issued a voluntarily, please don't take your wastewater to those treatment facilities. The industry has stopped taking it the wastewater treatment facilities have stopped accepting their water. Most of them have. There's one in McKeesport that hasn't, and there's a few others that have not as well. But some of our partner organizations are currently suing them for Clean Water Act violations with those as well. But even if they're not taking it to treatment facilities, there's still, how do we treat this water? It's hugely toxic, and it can't go back into the watershed or into the hydrogeologic system. So they're injecting a lot of it. Ohio is actually getting a lot of our wastewater right now. There's one treatment facility in Williamsport, I think, that is actually capable of getting it down to the standards that the DEP requires to discharge. And they're recycling a lot of it. But at some point, you can't recycle it anymore. So that's the big question. What do we do when we reach that, okay, we can't reuse this water anymore, how do we treat it? The other source is groundwater and surface water contamination. And I'm sure most of you are familiar with the case endemic where the methane migration has gotten into their water, and also some other toxics, and in the battle that is going on there with the agencies in the industry. But groundwater and surface water contamination is most likely coming from mismanagement of the water at the wellhead. So as the water is coming back up from the process, the produced water out of the well, they are either spilling it on site, it's not getting into the storage facility properly, or if you see in this picture here, this is a frac pit holding wastewater, the liner has fallen down in on the side. These open pits are probably one of the biggest sources of water contamination with this industry, with tears in the liners, falling in, not keeping them overfilled, so when we get rains, they flow over into the streams. If you look at the violation list, that's probably where they have the most violations reported, is from these open water impoundments. And then we are seeing in some rural areas illegal dumping and spilling. Trucks just pulling off on the road and emptying the truck and continuing on. Now this is rare, it's not something you see commonly, but in the more remote rural location, the more often you're seeing this. It's happening frequently on state game lands because they're less used, less traveled. And then stormwater runoff isn't really a public health hazard water contamination-wise, but they have a laundry list of erosion and sedimentation violations, which are very impactful to the aquatic life in our streams and rivers, which, the ecosystem down the chain has an impact on what's going on in the health of our rivers. I always put this drinking water impact slide up. The current regulation is that any drilling from the drill well head 1,000 feet out is the presumed area for liability. So they have to pre-test 1,000 feet out from the well head. Now keep in mind, most of these well pads now are 20 to 50 acres. So 1,000 feet out from the wellhead isn't even getting you off of the well pad a lot of times with how big that they're making them now. And then we recommend that you get your water tested a half a mile. If you're within a half a mile of the well pad, and that's the difference. The well head is where the actual drill is going down into the ground. The well pad would be the edge of the pad that they create. we highly recommend that you get a testing done on your own water if you're going to have a drill rig within a half a mile of your home. And then there's two critical aspects to doing that. If you get your water tested, you want to make sure that it's done by a DEP certified laboratory, and you want to make sure that a technician collects your sample. Not all of our certified labs will send out a technician. Some of them will ask you to mail a sample of water into them. The technician is crucial because of a chain of custody that needs to be set up. If something would happen to your water, you would want to make sure that if you had to go and fight and litigate for it, that everything was set in place beforehand. So here's some pictures of well sites and what can happen to the aesthetic impact. And when I was driving out here today from Greene County, Pennsylvania, all the way in the corner, I couldn't help but notice the gorgeous hillsides full of continuous forest. And just to think, 3-4 years down the line, it may not look like that anymore. It may be fragmented well sites along those hillsides as you're driving to State College from the west. And the impact that that will have on our tourism industry, on wildlife habitat. I have a bachelor's of science in biology, and my focus was animal behavior, specifically in their habitat. So you have significant edge habitat animals and species and significant interior habitats in the forest. So, this isn't really a topic that's being looked at by regulation. It isn't a topic that's being looked at by any of the agencies. The industry definitely doesn't care too much about this. The National Science Academy has looked at it some, and the Nature Conservancy is currently looking into it. But, if you're at Ohiopyle and you're hiking the Great Allegheny Passage and you see something like that from Loyal Stock State Forest, you're not going to be as encouraged to hike the Allegheny Passage anymore, because you don't hike it to see drill rigs and drill pads. You hike it to see the wildlife and the nature that's there. And then pipeline development. We currently have a 16.2-mile pipeline going through our watershed with 47 stream and wetland encroachments. In Pennsylvania, the way that we have streams and rivers, you're not going to put a 10-mile pipeline anywhere without impacting a stream or a wetland. And probably the biggest problem with the pipeline development is the way that they're going about putting them from a business practice. And one of the things that we have been trying to figure out a way to work on is, an example is in Greene County, you have 3 different pipeline companies who put in 3 different pipelines, 3 different valleys adjacent to each other, when they could have worked together and put one pipeline in one valley and connected to that line. But the corporations aren't working with each other. They want different territories. And so we're getting a lot more surface damage, a lot more tree cutting that's happening, and a lot more stream and in wetland encroachments. And the big thing when you're watching pipeline development is erosion and sedimentation violations. Both of the pictures I'll show later on with erosion sedimentation is coming from pipeline development. They are probably the worst for not keeping their plans in place. They're cutting these pipelines down steep slopes in the springtime when we get record rain. And then also, when they're boring underneath, at times, they're not getting down far enough, and the soil is blowing out. We're getting bentonite spills in the pipelines. So air is not my specialty, and we partner with the Group Against Smog and Pollution when we give these trainings, so they always give the air presentation. I do know some general about it, but if there's questions on air later on, I may not be able to answer them. But the big air impacts from this industry are fugitive emissions from the well and from the pipelines, and then diesel emissions. There is a large amount of diesel engines that are used in this process, with compressor stations, with the fracking of the wells, with the transporting of the water. And then fugitive emissions come to be a problem afterwards when you've got the tanks storing it. You tend to get some of the heavier hydrocarbons that are emitting out of it as well. And then there is some fugitive natural gas emissions as well, which is a global warming issue. So there's 4 pictures here of natural gas activity and 1 of coal activity. And so the one on the far left is a fracking operation. You have a compressor station down here, condensate tanks up there, and then a well flaring. And then I always put the coal-fired power plant in, because we fail to realize, as we're talking about air emissions, that the Northeast is already, most of it, in unattainment for our EPA air quality standards because of the coal-fired power plants we have and the other industrial activity. And I'm not quite sure what it is so much in the other parts of Pennsylvania, but in the southwestern portion of Pennsylvania, it is horrible. And we can't afford to have any more air toxins being put in, or we're going to have record cases of asthma and ozone issues and all of those types of health-related illnesses that come with air pollution. So this is something, as a lot of people are talking about air impacts from the gas industry, that I don't think they're realizing the cumulative impact of other industries we have in the region and how that's going to impact it. And the coal industry isn't too happy because they're currently having to clean up their act and, put better pollution controls on their plants. And they're like, well, this industry's coming in and they don't have to do anything. So why should we have to clean up our act too? So you're creating a battle between the industries as well. So before you can do visual assessment, you have to know a little bit about the regulations, what they're required to do, and you have to be able to track the activity. And it's probably the hardest part is tracking the activity. The DEP is getting a lot better about putting the information online and getting access to it, but they're still not perfect yet. And there's still a lot of errors in the stuff they put up online. This is a map from Frac Tracker. The red is actual drilled wells, and the green are permits. This is up to date as of January, and it's there's a lot already. And they're only in, the start of their industry. We're not in the peak of what this industry could potentially be in the state of Pennsylvania. So they have to get 3 different types of permits. They have to get a lot more permits, but 3 basic permits that you would be interested in as monitors or as keeping a watchdog in your community. How many of you live not in a river basin commission? You live in western Pennsylvania. Okay, so this water management plan was designed specifically for western Pennsylvania because we don't have a river basin commission. We don't have anybody looking at our water withdrawals or who's taking water out of our river systems and streams. And so when this industry came along, it was kind of like, oh crap, they're taking out millions of gallons of water. We're dewatering small streams. We've got to do something about this. So the DEP created these water management plans. My biggest pet peeve about these plans is you cannot access them online. The only way you can get them is by scheduling a file review at your regional DEP office. So if you live in, the corner of Somerset County, you have to drive almost 2 hours to get to Pittsburgh to get access to this information. Or if you live in southern Butler County, you have to drive 2 hours to get up to Meadville to get to this information. So it's not very accessible at all. One thing we do as the Watershed is I review every water management plan that comes into the Southwest Regional Office, and I have a lovely volunteer and intern that takes the data from these hard copies, enters it into an Excel spreadsheet, and then we put it up on Frac Tracker for volunteers to be able to get to it. Now, we're only doing it for the Southwest region because we don't have access to the Meadville office. The other permit they have to get is an erosion and sedimentation control permit, and then a well permit. And the information for the well permit and the erosion sedimentation control permit you can get online, but not all of the information. This map you see here, you can see the red dot, if you can see in the middle, is the actual well head, and then you see these lines going out. Those are the laterals that they're drilled. To get a map like that to see where they're actually drilling the lateral lines, you have to go to the DEP office and do a file review. So this is just a little bit more about the water management plan and what they have to record in it. These plans are quite thick. They have to record a lot of information. They were based off of the Susquehanna River Commission and their Q7, QC flows to make sure. So they really looked at what Susquehanna does, and then they kind of mimicked what they did for the western region. And really what we're interested when we look at these, and if you would ever go and do a review, is when you first open it, you'll see just a chart of, where their withdrawal points are, what's their maximum withdrawal point per day, and then it'll tell you, is it a source water, is it public water? They're buying a lot of water from the public water utilities. And they're also getting water now from some abandoned mine drainage facilities as well. They try to keep the withdrawals from the actual streams to rivers and main streams. You very rarely see them permitting on like a headwater stream because they just can't handle that type of intake. The erosion sedimentation control plans will give you the exact area where the well pad is going to be, and it also tells you their best management practices. What type of controls are they going to put in place to ensure that the runoff doesn't end up off-site? How are they going to, specific details like how are they going to gravel their access roads, things like that. And there's a 5-acre requirement. So when this industry first started and we're doing exploratory wells, you often saw that the well pad was 4.99 acres because then they didn't have to get this permit. They were just allowed to go and their engineer could sign off on it. You're not seeing that so much anymore, at least in the Southwest. Some of these new areas they're going, and you will still see that. So you want to keep an eye out for that. Is the well actually 5 acres or not? We caught a few that were 5 acres or more, and they didn't get this permit, but tried to say, oh, it's under 5 acres. So that's something, as it's a new industry coming in, they're doing exploratory wells to keep a lookout for. But after that's done, and they're done with their exploratory wells, you're looking at well pads 20 to 50 acres inside. So they're definitely getting these permits. They're not going to bypass that 5-acre limit. As they move forward and kind of figure out what the gas is like in your community, then that's when they'll start to do the multiple wells per pad, which significantly increases your pad size. And then the well permit. Not all interested parties in the area are notified of when a well comes in. And this is really hard because you can be a neighbor, and next thing you know, you see construction and excavation and then a derrick outside your backyard, and you're like, what's going on? Nobody notified of me this. They only have to notify people with water supplies within 1,000 feet, which isn't that far at all. And then there's some regulation in here too about the well cannot be located 200 feet from a home, and it's 150 feet from an exceptional value or a high quality stream, and then it's 200 feet from any other stream that they're not about to be located. And this is something to keep an eye on. We've seen this broken a lot, but it's not really broken. They get a variance from the DEP. So we've seen a well pad and it was like 50 feet from the stream. So we called DEP and we were like, what's going on? This isn't the regulation. And they got a variance from the DEP to put it 50 feet from the stream. And so variances are kind of handed out like candy, we like to say, almost, unless you can test them. Sometimes if you can catch it before construction, before they get the variance, and you cause a ruckus a little bit, just a pain in the butt sometimes to the DEP. They won't grant the variance, but that's a long shot. It doesn't always happen. So there are 3 tools you can use that the DEP offers to stay informed. There's eFax, eNotice, and the Pennsylvania Bulletin. And if you look on this handout that I gave you here, there is a link to our visual assessment manual, which goes into much greater detail, everything I'm covering today and some more. But there's also detailed instructions in that manual on how to use these 3 tools online. They're not the easiest to navigate. They are on the DEP website, which isn't the easiest to navigate, but they are really beneficial. The e-notice will actually send you an email. You can sign up to be notified just for your township or your county. I recommend never going beyond the county because you'll get a lot. Like if you do the entire state, you're going to get 100 notifications a day. We really encourage volunteers to just stay within their townships or the 3 around them to get notifications of those. eFax is something you can search in after the fact. So say you know there's a well already and you want to get some more information on it, you can search that. And so we'll go through step by step a little bit how to use.
We write that down. It's not on the handout.
It's the visual assessment manual link is underlined. It says to learn more about visual assessment, download our manual at the link below. All of these are on that manual too, yeah, and they're all off of our website as well, yeah. And so when you go to eFax, you're gonna get this sort of screen here. The easiest way to search is to click the site by county municipality right above the reports in the left-hand column. And then you can just click on the county that you're interested in. So in this case, we did Somerset County. And then we knew that there were wells there, Sailor Unit. They name these wells most frequently after the last name of the landowner, and then it'll say unit, and then there will be a number, an H, an OG well. If you live in a county that has a lot of shallow gas drilling and still current shallow gas drilling, one way to signify the difference in this eFax system is that shallow gas wells very rarely have an H in their permit name, and Marcellus wells frequently do. And an H means that that well is going horizontal. Now you'll see some Marcellus wells without the H because it's just a vertical well. They are still doing some just vertical Marcellus wells, and it won't have the H in the name because it's not having a horizontal bore. So then you can click on one of these names. So we did the Sailor Unit 1H, and it brings up this sheet, and you'll see the client, the facility name, and so this is the permit that they've got, to drill and operate well permit. You'll see inspections. There was a routine and complete inspection and no violations issued, but you'll see the last time this well was inspected was in 2009, and it's 2012. So, and then if you click on this authorization number here, it will take you into more information and shows you the actual permit number, which is usually something you'll need that to search in other tools that DEP has to find more information on it. And then you can click down here, the View Map and eMaps. Now, I have never been able to get eMaps to work for me. Some of our colleagues have. It only works in Internet Explorer, so that's a key that a lot of people don't realize. If you're in some other browser system, it won't work. You have to be in Internet Explorer for eMaps to work. And then you can zoom in, and it's supposed to show you where the well is. There's another tool on the DEP's website now that you can go to and find well details. I really encourage everybody to go to the DEP's oil and gas website and just look around and explore. They've got a lot of information on there if you look for it, but there's a tool there where you can put the permit number in, and it pulls up a mapping system that uses Google Maps and just shows you that one well, so you can see what streams are near it, roads, and stuff like that too. So this is the eNotice website. And then we're going to touch on the visual assessment protocol here. And this is, like I talked about before, just when you're out in the field or walking around, how can you notice if something is not right, or they're breaking a regulation, or something may need further investigation by DEP and it issues a call, warrants a call to them. And this was adapted by the Alarms Marcellus Show Monitoring Protocol. So there are 4 basic types of disturbances you'll see with visual assessment. The most common is land disturbance. So here's 2 pictures, both from pipelines. One of them is actually complaint and one of them is not. And this is important to note. The one on your left is not a complaint. The water seems muddy and dirty, but we had just had record heavy rains before it. But if you look at the black part of their control there's no runoff coming through that. So if you see a muddy stream, it doesn't initially institute a complaint. You kind of want to follow up and see if, you can continue going upstream and see if if it stops. If it stops upstream somewhere, then there's definitely a discharge coming from somewhere or a plume. If it doesn't, it could just be because we had heavy rains. And to keep weather in mind too, if we haven't had any rain and the stream looks like that, then there's probably an issue involved. But to check their plans and make sure that they're working properly, this that they have here is called a filter sock. And this is commonly what the industry is using now. They've kind of stopped using those silt fences that you've seen in the past before with the hay bales. They tend to need a lot more upkeep, and these filter socks seem to do a better job at what's going on. Now, the stream to the right here, you can't see, but behind the trees was a pipeline that was going in Somerset County, and this was actually near the home of our Youghiogheny Riverkeeper. And we hadn't had any rain or snowmelt for a week, and she saw the stream looking like this. And so she couldn't really get back onto the site, but she tried to go as far as she could with public access. There's a safety portion to this training that I left out, so it is really important to note that if you don't have permission, written permission, or it's not public property, do not go onto the land. This is such a hot topic, and there are a lot of trespassing cases being put against individuals who are trying to catch complaints. If you have a neighbor who says, yeah, you can go on my land, we highly suggest that you get it in writing, that he's okay with you doing monitoring on his land, only because of how contentious this issue is in some communities. With monitoring we've done before, it's never been an issue. Sure, go ahead, check pH in our streams. We don't care, but not so much with this topic. So she did go, and they didn't have any controls up above there at all. And the mud was just running directly into the stream, and we filed a complaint for it. So spills and discharges are something else that you can come across. So the safety tidbit with spills and discharges is if you see anything funky in the streams or on the ground, don't touch it. Don't put your hand in it. Don't go down and smell it or anything like that. And just take a picture. So the key to visual assessment and getting complaints listened to is taking pictures, timestamp pictures. Every complaint I filed with a picture has got an action followed on it. Every complaint I filed without a picture has just fallen through the cracks. So if you send a picture to the DEP inspector, he can look at that picture and tell right away, yeah, that's a violation. No, that's not. I don't have to waste my time going down into that part of the county. So it's really important. Most cell phones have timestamps on their pictures. I just carry my phone with me everywhere I go. But if not, if you're using a regular camera, make sure your timestamp is current. And they can actually use those pictures in enforcement action. They can't use volunteer water monitoring data, but your pictures and video, they can use. That's a credible source. So the picture on the bottom here that you see with the tank, one of these tanks is rusted around the corner and was actually leaking. That's obviously a violation. You don't want that fluid just sitting around the soil. Now this was a landowner's property, so he had access to this tank. It was, his right. Most likely you're not going to be able to get that close to the facility if you're just doing recreation or hiking unless you actually have a well site on your property. Or sometimes with game lands, you can you can see it that close after they're completed. On the top there, it's just a diesel spill. With all the diesel fluid that's being used with this industry, we have seen some diesel spills in the stream, so you definitely want to document that. And then the bottom is foam. They use a surfactant in the fracking process, and sometimes when that gets into the waters, it will actually foam up, and you can catch it that way. And then I talked about illegal dumping, and this is a really touchy subject because oftentimes the DEP gets calls where there's a truck by the stream with a hose in it, they must be dumping. But 90% of the time, 99% of the time, they're just withdrawing water for the process, and it's permitted and it's allowed. So there are some signs to tell the difference between withdrawing and dumping. A no-brainer is that if there's a hose in the stream and there's no pump running, the water isn't naturally going to flow from the stream up into the truck. They have to pump it up in there. So that's a hint. Bubbling at the end of the hose, unusual odors, and discoloration of water near the hose. And this is an issue where, safety is of concern again. I can guarantee 99% of the time if a truck driver is illegally dumping water, he's not going to be friendly and welcoming you to the situation to take pictures and see what's going on. And there have been some threats from drivers to volunteers, and so anytime anything like that happens, you just back away. If you can try to get all of these trucks have US or PA DOT numbers, or the company of the truck, you record those two things, you leave the driver completely out of the situation, and you use that with your complaint, that you had saw that happen. Then you can go after he leaves and look at the water. If they are dumping direct wastewater into the stream, if you have a TDS meter, drop it in and take a reading. If you catch it instantly after that, 9 times out of 10, your meter won't even read the TDS. It'll be so high. Pure flowback fluid has total dissolved solid readings of 100,000, 200,000 milligrams per liter or parts per million. It's really, really high, so it's going to throw your meter completely off. So this is pictures from the Wetzel County Action Group in West Virginia, an amazing group of citizen watchdogs. And one of these trucks is normal water dust control. If you live near dirt roads, you may have seen this before, or if you have other industry near you, that they will frequently do dust control on the dirt roads. And then one of them is just a truck illegally dumping his water, his brine water. And so they did capture this. They did take pictures, and the West Virginia DEP did actually issue a violation to this trucking company for doing that. If you want to talk to people or go to this website below, I'll give you guys a minute to write it down. There are amazing pictures, amazing advice. This group of citizens Wetzel County was one of the first areas that was heavily drilled, and there's some people who have experienced significant impacts of what's going on, but they did a great job at becoming watchdogs for their communities and keeping them on their feet. So gas migration or leakage is sort of the last of the 4 topics that you may see frequently happening. If you have a stream in your community that you know already has gas migration, there is some natural methane migration in Pennsylvania, you want to document the amount, like how much does it bubble on a regular basis, what's going on. You can videotape it and record that videotape, and then you can tell if there's a difference between it. Or if there's a stream that's never had it before, and all of a sudden they started fracking a well a mile or 2 away, and you have methane migration, that's something to document that's of concern. In Greene County, we're seeing methane migration of up to 3 or 4 miles from well sites, but a lot of that has to do, there's a lot of longwall mining in Greene County, so there's different avenues for this methane to get underground in Greene County. But in a lot of areas across Pennsylvania, we have abandoned mines everywhere. So we have, lots of avenues for this methane to migrate and get to different locations throughout the state. Hissing noises, if you're near pipelines, are always of concern. You usually want to call, that's usually a 911 call, or you want to call the gas company immediately. A lot of the pipelines that we currently have installed in the state of Pennsylvania need updated bad. And a lot of the pipelines that are being put in right now are being put in so quickly that they're often missing checks, safety checks that they would go through. One thing we say is that union pipelines are usually much better put in than non-union pipelines because they have an extra inspector that goes through and makes sure that the seals are done properly. And then any unusual odor that you smell. A rotten egg smell can signify hydrogen sulfide. The natural gas with this area, you're most likely not going to smell unless it's been to a transmission or a processing facility first. And these gathering lines that are being put in, it's still not going to have that mercaptan added to it yet, so you're not going to smell the gas unless it's been through a compressor station or a processing facility where they add that component so you can smell the natural gas. So reporting your observations, and this is really key. I handed everybody another handout. Since I deal primarily with the Southwest, I only knew their number, but I printed out a handout of every emergency number for every DEP region in the state. They don't have an easy one number fits all. It depends on what region that you're in. And anytime you see an incident or something that's reportable or you have questions, you can always call us and we can try to help you out and see if you need to report it. But 99% of the incidents, all of the incidents, get reported to DEP. But that's not the only agency you can report to. And we encourage you to report to as many as possible to try to get an action. If anything is in the waterways, report it to Fish and Boat. We've been very successful with some erosion sedimentation issues at getting a Fish and Boat commissioner out there and to enforce an action much faster than DEP gets out there and to enforce an action. And they have that enforcement authority, and they usually have local commissioners closer than what your DEP inspector would be to get out to the area to investigate it. Fish kills, absolutely, get reported to Fish and Boat Commission, but anything in the waterways. And the number down there is their 1-800 number across the state to file a complaint. And then the EPA doesn't come out to investigate your complaint, but they're really interested on what's going on in the state of Pennsylvania and how many complaints are being filed and is the DEP responding. If you've read in the media, you know that the DEP and PA and the EPA are kind of at each other's throats right now. So they want to know, so you can email them your complaint information, and they're just kind of keeping a tally of what's going on, and should they come in and do something? Is there a need for some sort of federal control over what the state agency is doing? And if you file a complaint, we're also interested in knowing, I mentioned before that we're having a problem with the DEP responding. If you live in the DEP Southwest region, we definitely want to hear about it, that you're doing it. And when you file a complaint, there's 2 key things with the DEP. You're supposed to get a complaint number. You want to record that number down because the inspector will not follow back up with you. You have to have the initiative to call back and follow up and see what happened. They don't have the time to follow up with everybody that's filed a complaint. So if you record that complaint number, then they can easily pick out, where it was, and often the guy who takes the complaint can email you sort of the complaint form that he sends to the inspector. I know in the DEP Southwest region, he will do that. He does it for me, and you can also follow up with him as well. But in the Southwest region, we're having our volunteers send us complaint numbers, and I'm following up with the DEP and saying, hey, what's up, what's going on? And we're keeping a track and a tally of how often the DEP responds and doesn't respond, and if it ends up being significantly different, we're going to have some tactics at taking that to legislators or the media or to Secretary Crancer and saying, what's up, like, do your job. So we're not going to take this not responding to citizen complaints. That's part of the process, and we'll bring it up to bring the issue up. So these are some resources. There's the visual assessment manual link again. We do have, if you want to attend the actual whole visual assessment training, we're going to be doing a webinar on February 23rd. So anybody across the state can log on to it. If you go to our website, there's a new feed up about something that just happened, but the second one down, you can see how to register for our webinar. And it'll start at 6 p.m. It doesn't cost anything, and the webinars usually don't last 3 hours because we haven't had a lot of questions, but the first one we did, we only had like 15 attendees on it, so if we get 100 people on this next webinar, it may actually last the 3 hours with questions. But it's a way, if you know of other people who may be interested in this community, like having a house party, putting it up on the TV, and just getting them this information across the state. We're trying to find a way to provide this visual assessment information across the state without having to get the funding and money to actually travel statewide. So we offer 2 webinars. This will be our second. But if there's a lot of interest in it, we can easily do another webinar. And then my contact information is below, and I'll take questions now.
You do a train the trainer?
We did do one of those, and we are looking into more. So if there's a big enough group of people that want to do it and want to learn it, and you guys really want to reinstitute this project in your community, we'd be willing to come out and train you on what to do, what to look for. We have a new sort of community leader. So like the Stewardship project is evolving, so we're including water monitoring now, and part of that is a community leader project to it. So we are identifying community leaders or organizations in different parts of the state away from us to kind of take a leadership role with the Stewardship project and start doing exactly what you said, to institute it in your community, hold multiple trainings. So I mean, my contact information is there. It's on this paper as well, but I have business cards too. So if you're really interested in that, I'd like to follow up with you on that. And we'd love to see this get out and just get this information out to many places that are dealing with Marcellus activity as possible. The more watchdogs we have, the hope is that the industry will act properly and not cut corners. So,
just a note that these pipeline companies are having success in taking property by eminent domain. To a friend of mine around Waynesburg, they cut a big 50-foot wide swash right through his property. Even though he fought it, he lost, and they took it by eminent domain.
yeah. So that was, I have to repeat the questions for the recording. So that was a question about eminent domain being taken with the pipelines, and that's a really important issue to bring up. I guarantee that was through Greene County is being constructed a federal transmission line as well. So here's the big difference. Gathering lines do not have eminent domain, but the landmen don't want you to know that. So if you're talking to your neighbors, other community members, if it is a gathering line, it is not considered a public utility, and they do not have eminent domain. They have to agree to a price and a location. You have to settle an easement with them. Now, transmission lines do, and so there's a FERC, is the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, regulates any pipeline that crosses state lines, and they do then have eminent domain because they are feeding gas to a city or consumers, and they then do. And it's really confusing for landowners to be able to tell the difference, especially in a place like Greene County when you've got federal lines coming in, you've got gathering lines going. I mean, they've got every type of pipeline you can think of right now being constructed in the county. So as landmen come and talk to you, one saying, yeah, I can take it. The other is trying to say, yeah, I can take it, but really he can't. So it's something to really be in note of. Some of the gas companies are trying to get public utility status for gathering lines. They're not being so successful at it, mainly because other pipeline companies are contesting that because they have no problem getting it. So you don't need eminent domain. It's just a battle between that as well. Go ahead.
Can I find out more about where they have planned pipelines?
So that question was, how do you find out where do they have planned pipelines? The DEP notice. It's really hard to get that information. Our Westmoreland County Planning Commissioner actually asked for it and was told he couldn't have it because of Homeland Security reasons. But from a planning aspect, it was really crucial to him. How is he supposed to attract businesses into the county if he doesn't know where these pipelines are going to be constructed? Because you can't build on top of a pipeline. But through e-notice, you can request that you be notified of any pipeline application that comes in, and that's also through the Department of Oil and Gas. And so they have to submit an erosion and sedimentation permit first for the pipeline, and then they have to submit a water or stream and wetland encroachment permit, and that's usually a joint if there's wetlands involved and a certain size of streams, but most often it's usually jointly they have to get that with the Army Corps of Engineers as well. So sometimes it's easy to call the Army Corps of Engineers and be like, are there any pipeline permits in my community? And they're more friendly than the DEP at answering some of those questions. Yeah, go ahead.
Could you confirm again the distance that the wellhead itself has to be from the stream and then the wellhead?
So the question was the distance between the well pad and the wellhead from the stream. All of the regulations, the wording is wellhead. So the wellhead has to be 200 feet from a home, 100 feet from a stream, or 150 feet from an exceptional value or high quality stream. Which, when we're talking about these pads, they're 20 acres now, you essentially, I guess, could have a pad with a stream running through it, and it could still be 100 feet from the well head. I don't really ever see that permitting happening, but we have seen them right up 50 feet from the streams before. So we had a question back here, and then I'll go to you. Go ahead.
Other than complaints, is there any sort of public participation process in any of these permits? Can you appeal them? Is there a decision? And you mentioned lawsuits. How did you get to that point?
So the question was, other than complaints, is there any public participation in the permitting process, and how did we get to lawsuits? Unfortunately, with oil and gas permitting, there is no public participation or process. And they have 45 days. A gas company submits a permit, and the DEP has to issue or deny it within 45 days. And they can only deny it if it's got something clearly wrong, like it's not meeting the 200 feet regulation to a home, or they have to get a variance for a stream or something like that. The only people who have the right to appeal a permit is the coal owner that the wellhead is going through, the landowner that the property is on, but the landowner has to have really good cause to appeal it. One of the wells in our community, the landowner tried to appeal it and lost because he didn't have proper cause to do it. So it would have to be like they're going to put the well 150 feet from your home in not 200 feet, so then you could appeal it. And then and that's the only grounds to appeal a permit, and it almost never gets appealed. How did we get to litigation? It had nothing to do with the permitting process. It had to do with the Clean Water Act. So the wastewater treatment plants were discharging water from these industries without the proper permit. They were accepting industry water without the proper permit from DEP to accept it, therefore violating the Clean Water Act. And then Three Rivers Waterkeeper and Clean Water Action were the organizations that took them to court for that violation. So, go ahead.
I'm appealing a permit right now, and I'm not the landowner or the leaseholder, but I'm a neighbor, and I'm having some success with it. So I think if you just push back a little bit.
Yeah.
Now, the latest thing is the gas company doesn't want to go to court, so they're considering just withdrawing the permit. So I would attempt that route as, for all the obvious reasons. You don't want to be living next to a 50-acre.
Were you within 1,000 feet of the well?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. No, that's a tactic that I would encourage. I mean, if you're willing to do it and go for it, and she's exactly right. They are avoiding litigation on a lot of issues, and it's not like they don't have all of these other places to put the wells still. So, you had a question?
So the landowner lost in this situation? So how did they even get permission in the first place? Like, do they need the permission of the landowner?
He,
Does he like take it back or something?
No, so this the question was that the landowner lost, but it was his property, so how did they get permission to begin with? So he had signed a lease, and this is happening, and I'm sure you're familiar with it, a lease back in 2004, before they even knew what Marcellus was, and he thought it was shallow gas drilling. We have a lot of shallow gas drilling in Westmoreland County, and that's what the landman came in and sold it as. So next thing he knows, there's a 20-acre well pad on his property, and he was not happy with it at all and just feels really taken advantage of. And that's a case we're hearing a lot from people who have signed leases. So one of the reasons, some people in this movement are completely opposed to anybody who signed a lease, and I always say you never know what the situation was in which they signed it, how much knowledge they knew beforehand. That's why one of the primary goals of this project is education, so community members aren't blindsided as landmen come and talk to them, and that they do know. And I will say that in our community, the company that is trying to get leases is having a really hard time getting the deals they want and not paying, more or agreeing to different things in the terms of the lease. And they're not very happy with me in particular, but I don't care because that means I'm doing a good job. So, well, go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick comment. I have a friend who has a farm, and I mean, one of his big issues all along is, you've got to get a lawyer before you sign these leases. So you work it out on your terms rather than the CAN program the company has, because they're going to do it the best way for them.
Right. It can't be any lawyer either. It has got to be somebody who has oil and gas or mineral background.
So the comment there for the recording was that when you are being approached by a landman or thinking about a lease that you must get an attorney, if anybody calls me or comes into my office and talks about a lease, you can also find on our website a toolkit that we developed that has some leasing suggestions, but the first thing that we have in that is that you go and talk with an oil and gas attorney and to contact us. We have a list of recommended attorneys that work for the landowner and not for the industry. Sometimes it's really hard to find an attorney that hasn't also represented the industry as well. So,
Before you even go get an attorney, please go ask your neighbors if they would mind living next to an industrial area and if they mind breathing benzene from condensate tanks the rest of their lives.
Go ahead.
I want to just make one comment too about some of these leases that were signed between 2004 and 2007. Up in Lawrence County, a landowner signed a lease for also what she thought was just going to be one of these benign shallow wells, and not going into detail, but she went to the county courthouse, and first of all, the landman told her it wouldn't be recorded on her deed, and it was, but she discovered that a notary had stamped the lease, and she never had a notary present. She, on her own, went out and researched and found 300 other landowners, and now they're coming out of the woodwork. And so it's a notary violation, and in two ways, too. Not only was the notary not present for the signing of the lease, the notaries that they've been investigating also had oil and gas connections. So this is something also for some of the landowners who have been kind of taken, have them look into whether or not there is a notary stamp on their lease. There's a class action lawsuit filed.
Yeah.
You gotta go to the courthouse.
Yeah.
It's public record. Anybody's. You can go get anybody's lease, your neighbors, and it's all. Yep, it's all public record.
Go ahead.
When we purchased our farm 6 years ago, the folks that we bought it from had signed a lease with a gas company, but when we bought it, we got 50% of the oil and mineral rights. We have not signed the lease. So I'm wondering, because they did, but we didn't, and we own 50%, can they do it anyway?
Well, number one, I'm not an attorney.
Yeah, I was gonna say.
Yeah, I would definitely ask Russ Pfeiffer that question, but if you don't get an answer from him, send me an email or a call, and I will vet it out to our attorneys that we work with, but I don't know the answer to that question.
I mean, just a comment. I'm not an attorney either,
Yeah.
but if that were a way out, people would be selling their property to someone they know to get out from under it. So I can't imagine
Yeah.
you are not, liable for whatever agreement was made prior to your sale. That's my guess. I don't know. It'd be too easy. It'd be an end around for too many leases to get out from under legally.
Go ahead.
Do you know anything about like automatic renewal of permits? I live in Maryland where, I'm in the Watershed in Garrett County, and it's coming, I'm sure.
So the question was about automatic renewal of permits. It really depends on the term of the lease. There can be as simple a renewal as we walked onto your property and put a straw on the ground, so that's activity and your permit is automatically renewed, or it can be as technical as you have to have the well producing X amount of cubic feet a day in order for me to renew. So it really depends on the terms of the lease. The really early leases were signed. Most of them are really bad and like, hey, and so usually they'll like put a bulldozer or something on your property and say, okay, it's active. What's happening a lot right now, because the cost of gas is so low, the only wells that are being drilled are the wells that they have to drill to hold a lease. So in Westmoreland County, what we're seeing is they're going and they're drilling all of these wells, but not fracturing them. They're just drilling them, then they've started the process, and it holds the lease until the cost of gas goes back up or whatever that they can do. So it really depends on the term of the lease.
Do you happen to know, I live in
Do you work with there's a citizenship, yeah, Nadine. I work with them some, yeah. Yeah, so they...
And so I'm kind of in this area where it's a great agricultural area, it's a big Amish community, and my husband and I have a relationship with them, but we're not really comfortable discussing the issue.
Right.
I don't know if you may know someone who's worked with that kind of a community before.
We don't, yeah.
Back in 2005, and they're coming up for renewal.
Yeah, but I mean, luckily for Maryland, you guys don't have any. Like, you have sort of a stop on.
No, there's a moratorium right
Yeah.
now. So 2014,
and
making the inroads.
So there is something and this would be another question for an attorney, but there is something in the lease about moratoriums and being able. There's usually some wording in there like something about if the state passes a moratorium that allows the lease to continue, or like they're not responsible for actions of the state or acts of God or things like that. So that, I would really have talked to an attorney and see what they have to say. They would be better able to answer that question than I am.
We own property in West Virginia, and we have this convoluted thing on one of our pieces of property. The neighbors, we co-own some of the oil and gas rights, and they called and said, well, they won't give us any lease money, they won't do anything for that property because, they have to have our consent.
Mm-hmm.
So at least in, and I don't know if that's state specific, but at least in this particular case, the gas company would not couldn't just drill a partial. They had to have everybody's consent.
Right.
And the second thing that's good news for a lot of people is that there's some very major new natural gas finds in Africa that are coming online that may suppress the price of gas even more. And as the price of gas goes down, that would slow it up.
Yeah. It does cost them between $10 and $20 million to drill a well and get it to production. So unless the cost of gas is around $3 or higher, they're not really making any money off of it. So that is a big difference. But they do have 3 applications currently with the Department of Energy to export gas at the moment. So, yeah, I think the last time that I checked. So, in the back there.
This really might not be where you want your workshop to go, so just tell me to shut up. But honestly, I feel we're all wasting our time here on all these particular issues. We're working in an illness that goes so much deeper. It has to do with the corporations being declared as people.
Yeah.
And they
Exactly.
have got us running around fighting this, fighting that, fighting this, where we're not dealing with the main disease.
Right.
And I don't know. I go to these things now. I don't know what to do. Does anybody feel like the same way?
I feel exactly the same way. when I
Yeah.
talk, I often lead my discussions with, these corporations are a bunch of people hiding behind a piece of paper, and this piece of paper has more rights than you or I do.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And just to wake people up and start the discussion.
I mean,
Just
my land
have to
deed
talk about
means,
it.
our land deed means nothing because of this forced pooling that's coming. Our US Constitution means nothing.
Yep.
I mean, I'm wearing a T-shirt right now that says "Occupy the Hollers," and I am pissed off, and I'm occupying my hollers.
And I think that exactly right. And often I'm preaching to the choir about a lot of these things. And one aspect of this and you guys come from a rural community, so you can sort of understand it. I get a lot of pushback from urban communities that why aren't you guys just pushing for a ban? Why aren't you guys trying to stop this? Why aren't we rallying in a different way? But growing up in a rural community, especially I grew up in the coal fields in Greene County, and bringing up issues like this to your neighbors is not always the easiest thing. And what we have found is that monitoring is sort of this secret gateway or doorway into activism. I've had some monitors who started with me 2 years ago and were, pro Marcellus, but we're going to monitor it, we're going to keep track of it, and are now some of the best activists I have out there working on it once they got out and saw what was happening. So it's sort of a different organizing tactic you have to use in rural communities because you don't one plus about the gas industry is we're not attacking people's jobs. When I was organizing around coal, I was attacking people's jobs most often when I'm saying we need to stop coal mining and using coal, and here's a family full of generations of coal miners. So that's one plus we have with this issue, but you're exactly right in where we need to go and touch these things, and it's just to get there, we've got to wake up some more of these rural people, and if monitoring is a back road door that we can get them to do it, then let's just try to do it as fast as we can. Yeah. Go ahead.
There are also, my name's Peter. I'm from State College, and we passed a ban on fracking in State College. So, and I was one of the people who worked on that really hard. One of the things that I think I completely agree with you. A ruling like Citizens United makes living as a human very difficult, and you're seeing the most poisonous presidential campaign, if you want to call it that, corporate campaign for speech in history right now. I think that doing things like this are really great, and I think that you also have to go to the sort of the highest level too. I have petitions with me for a moratorium. If anyone in here wants to sign it, you're a resident of Pennsylvania, please come and see me and sign it. I also think that there are ways to scale something like this up. Mm-hmm. So right now the price of gas is so low that companies are taking their wells and they're going to Ohio where there's wet gas because they can get the propane and the butane out of that gas, and that's higher, so they can still be marginally profitable. Because it's being slowed down, there's a political window there that I would encourage you to go and talk to your representative or senator about, which would be to enact a piece of legislation that would kick in a comprehensive environmental review. If we had a comprehensive environmental review that looked at all of the damages that we all know are happening, that could set up a system that could be just permanently put into the DEP that could be used in future things like this as like a safety switch. So I would really, really encourage you to go to your probably corrupt politician who still wants to look good. But they still want to look good. And so if they say, oh, this makes me look fair, a lot of them will do it. I mean, even crappy Republicans, not Gene Yaw, he's not going to do it. He sucks. But a number of others will do it. And so I think that you kind of have to look at all of the levels.
And one of the goals of this project is to sort of lead into an advocacy way afterwards. So, we definitely, I probably spend 4 or 5 times a year in Harrisburg, and, we're constantly setting up meetings with our local representatives and getting volunteers there. And what's nice about this is now you're talking to your representative with volunteers who have seen firsthand what was going on in their district. So there is an advocacy portion to this. We are an advocacy organization as well and do lots of it. So, go.
Excuse me if you went over this earlier, I come in a little bit. But I heard people say that they're worried about once they start to horizontally drill, if they still go to your property without your permission. How would you know? Or do they do that?
So the question was, can they just go underneath you horizontally without your permission or without you knowing? Legally, no. And that's the key. And so, and a lot of times what a landman will say, and we've heard this a lot, is, well, we'll just take it anyways, or it will just flow anyways over to the other side. Well, with shallow gas drilling, that was the case. In sandstone, in gassets and sandstone, it does just move to where the least, the least source of restriction goes. I'm not a physicist either. But with shale gas drilling, it's different. The gas is not released from that shale layer unless it is fracked or fractured. So they would literally have to drill the bore underneath of your property and fracture, and that is taking. That is illegal. It's called subterranean trespassing. There are cases of it in Washington County currently right now. And so the one map I showed you with the horizontal bores, they also have to submit to the DEP a completion report, which shows exactly where those horizontal bores ended up. And the technology they have for this is phenomenal, what they can do. They put a sensor in one horizontal bore while they drill the other, and they can direct it up, inches. They know exactly where they're going. So it wouldn't be accidental, we accidentally went under your property. No, they know how to change the pressure, to change the size of the fractures, and it's actually phenomenal how much technology is involved in this and what they can do. So it is illegal. The problem is catching it and spending the money to investigate it. You would have to drill a borehole to actually take a sample of the shale to determine if they fractured it or not. There's two cases, I think, that Smith & Butts, the attorney firm in Canonsburg, is representing for subterranean trespassing right now. But with longwall coal mining, they do it all the time. They have a fund that they put aside just for when people sue them for taking their coal without permission. So I wouldn't be surprised if the gas industry doesn't sort of follow that route as well.
In Maryland, they're a little bit more proactive for the homeowner, and the Attorney General developed a booklet to give to the landowners so that they are aware of their options, how to handle the gas companies when they come knocking on your door, and everything you need to know. So Pennsylvania, of course, didn't do that because Pennsylvania is always reactive and not too often proactive. Maryland,
Are you from Maryland?
well, I lived in Baltimore for about 35 years, but I live in New York right now. It's just a suburb of Baltimore.
Yeah, so if there's anybody in here who could offer me any sort of resources, I would love to have a meeting in my community. I live in a really nice agricultural community, with neighbors that I'm having, trouble communicating with, and I feel like I need to educate.
Well,
so today,
yeah, talk with me after, because you're still in the Yawk Watershed, so we can definitely work with you. Yeah.
Yeah.
You can contact them and get them.
Yeah.
Just a quick comment regarding the trespassing. I know some landowners feel there's no way I can know what they're doing. I might as well sign and make some money at it. I've heard that from people too.
That's a situation that a lot of people are in. My parents are currently in that situation where the coal company essentially owns all the land around my parents' farm, and they're going to drill. There's no doubt about it. And the farm, two of the other farmers have sold, and one has held out. As long as the other one holds out, my parents will hold out. But the mindset is, and I don't know what to tell a landowner on this issue, is that you're going to have a well next to you. You're going to experience the impacts. So you might as well sign a non-surface lease and not have any surface damage and still collect a royalty check to help fight the process. We've had some landowners who have said, okay, like, I'll do it, and I'm giving, X amount of my royalty check as a donation to all of the organizations that are working on fighting this issue. That's a really tough situation for a lot of landowners in the state right now. What do you do when you're completely surrounded? You don't want to lease, but you're going to be impacted either way. So do you collect a check and be impacted, or do you not collect a check and be impacted? And I can't tell people what to do in that situation. I'll never tell someone to sign or not to sign. It's a situation you have to figure out on your own with your own morals and ethics and what is the best thing to do.
And then that money also accumulates further into the hands of a corporation that will screw you over anyway.
Right. It's been an interesting conversation with my family. Go ahead.
We all know that Halliburton has proprietary rights for the fracking fluid. And to my knowledge, and maybe somebody here knows something about this, but to my knowledge, they haven't disclosed exactly what it is.
They've disclosed the chemicals they use. What they haven't disclosed is the specific recipe and amounts that are needed. So they'll say we use this list of chemicals, but they won't tell you what different amounts they use in.
The reason I bring it up is that, as underlining the lady back there, is that how do you fight the biggest corporation in the world that probably is the most involved in Afghanistan and Iraq? It's like they own it. And like so many of us, you feel totally powerless. And I don't know what the answer is, but when we talk about Occupy stuff, it seems to me like more of the world is going to move toward that, because that's what they're doing now in Syria. They don't like it, or Egypt. That's the only thing that seems to work. And I hate to get this far as some kind of revolution.
It is.
But that's the only thing that seems to work.
Well, the yes we can president, we all had such high hopes for him. I understand the union, it says, and he doesn't have a clue about Marcellus shale. We need responsible shale gas drilling, just like we had responsible torture under the last administration. So yeah, I mean, it really is revolution time.
I would like to make a comment to please not make this a partisan issue, because it isn't.
Mm-mm.
And, I had a friend when I first started talking about this, and he said, oh, you're such a left-wing, true liberal. I'm a Republican, so don't make this about politics, because it's not. It's a human rights issue. Right, exactly. So I was a little upset with Josh Fox. I mean, when he got arrested the other day, he kept talking about it was the Republicans that did this, and I've been writing him and saying, you can't do this. You can't make this about politics, because it's not. And we won't win if we make it about politics. Politics is divisionary, and it will always keep us divided if we stay in those two parties.
A lot of the basis for this are on fundamental, just constitutional rights.
Yeah.
And that's it. We have the right to clean water and clean air and the enjoyment of our land. And we have the right to, property rights to make sure our property isn't destroyed by another property. So it's not. And I have talked to many different sides of the political party, and it is not a bipartisan issue at all. And I think when I talk to the legislators in Harrisburg, I don't really see it. I mean, I've worked on issues that are party issues, and this one does not come across to my mind as a party issue.
A number of years ago, I don't know, it was 4 years ago, 5 years ago, there's a man named Thomas Lindsay that came here, and you guys heard of him, the Democracy Project? And he actually tried to introduce into some court this whole issue about corporations being people, and he was chided by the court and saying this was established in the late 1800s. Do not mess with this. Well, we do have to mess with it, and I think we need to if I could donate all my money to Thomas Lindsay, who's still doing this work, that's where we need to get at the core of this rottenness.
And that's the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund. Yeah, CELDEF. And they are helping all of the cities that are passing bans.
Yeah, they drafted they drafted our community.
It's CELDEF, and Thomas Lindsley is the lead attorney for that organization. So, yeah, they're doing an amazing amount of work. Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund.
They drafted the Rights of Mother Earth that's in Peru.
Mm-hmm.
And Ben Price was the person who worked with us to draft that. CELDF.org. CELDF.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Time.
Time for one last question.
Okay.
I have the phone numbers right here.
I just wanted to know a little bit more about
Copy it down. Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund.
how,
Okay.
is it a volunteer-run organization? Did you always have consensus about working on drilling and?
So the question was just a little bit more about Mountain Watershed Association and what we do and how we formed. We do have a staff of 5, currently employing another organizer if anybody's interested. We're looking for a really good person to help with the Marcellus work we're doing, so we will have a staff of 6. We have a board of directors of about 20, I think, and they were formed in 1984 because of a deep mine proposal that came into the Indian Creek watershed. They successfully stopped the permit from getting issued and then decided that they needed to spend a lot of time doing remediation. The watershed was destroyed from abandoned mine drainage, and we've now cleaned up about 70% of it and are working on getting it up to 90%. So we do a lot of remediation and restoration work, but after they started doing that, we've got to continue to advocate to protect anything like that from happening again. And from the get-go, we've always worked on the Marcellus issue. I mean, we haven't come out with an official statement that says, we're opposed to drilling or we support drilling, but we've just decided that, we're against environmental degradation, and the way that it's happening right now is not, I don't feel like we need to have a statement. It just shows in the work that we do for it. And if you talk to any industry that knows us, they're not like, oh, wow, yay, they're for us. We get most of our funding from private foundations. We do a lot of fundraisers on our own, donations from the community. We, in our area, and one of the reasons I love working for Mountain Watershed Association is that we don't shy away from controversial topics. If something doesn't seem like, other people want to take it on, but it is having an impact on the community, then we raise up to the occasion and we work on it. And our basic goal is that we are a social justice organization and we are representing the communities in our watershed. And so we want to help them be better at what they are. And one of the reasons I got into this work was growing up in a rural community. I don't think we get the voice enough when it comes time for legislation and policy to be made, and I want to make sure that we're heard.
I have a quick, simple question about a homeowner's well. If I owned land and wanted to test my well before they started drilling nearby, how much does it cost? It depends on how many feet you drill down.
And what you want to test for.
No, it depends on what you want to test for.
What chemicals you want to
Yeah, what parameters. There's 3 tiers. There's a basic tier, which we recommend if you can't do anything, at least do the basic, and it covers about 15 parameters, and it's about $500 for that test. If you do the 3rd tier, which covers all of your, inorganic compounds, anything that you could possibly test for that this industry uses, costs about $1,000 to $1,500. So it can really get up there. We live in a really depressed community where people can't even afford the $500 test. So we're currently looking at ways to help them with that. But to do that, you're simply testing for your heavy metals, methane, and your total dissolved solids. And I kind of tell people who are having trouble with the money aspect is that's like an alert system. A lot of our monitoring protocols are red alert systems. So you do that test. If any of those come back with a hit beforehand, well, then you may want to go do the next test to see what you had in your well before drilling started. But if they don't come back with a hit, you do them again, you test again however many months after drilling's complete, and if you don't get a hit on any of those, then you're pretty good. I mean, total dissolved solids is going to increase no matter what if you have some sort of contamination from fracking fluids. And you're usually going to see barium and strontium as well. in our monitoring protocols, and if you attend alarms, I don't want to spoil if you're going to go to alarms presentation at all, but she will talk about barium and strontium and how they are signature chemicals for this industry, especially in regions where you have abandoned mine drainage and other industrial activity. You don't see barium and strontium combined with coal activity, but you will see it with drilling activity.
$1,500 will cover testing for radium, barium, strontium, and all those.
No, $1,500 will cover a whole bunch more. $500 covers sort of your basic. Yeah. There's a list, if you go to our website, there's a list of what that covers.